Thank you, everybody, for joining us on Fireside Leadership. I'm your co-host, Liza Magcale, and I'm in Toronto, Canada. My lovely co-host, Janice Lee, also in Toronto, Canada, and our
Yeah.
special guest that we really want to say thank you to today, Peng Cau. So, Janice, thank you for inviting Peng today, and I'd love for you to just give her an introduction.
Absolutely. I'm really excited and happy to have Peng here with us today. So just to give you a little bit of background about Peng. So she and her family came to Canada in 1980 as refugees from Cambodia. More into that story later. But Peng is a dynamic, charismatic, and innovative executive. She co-founded this company, Transformix Engineering Inc. She was its vice president and CEO for 21 years. And just more recently, ATS acquired Transformix, their intellectual property, in 2018. And after spinning off a new company, Peng became the board chair. And she also joined this company, now renamed as ATS, as their VP of Sales and Emerging Markets and Symphony. She's also served as a board member on a number of boards in committees in Kingston, Ontario, Ottawa, and Toronto. She is an entrepreneur coach with LSpark. That's an accelerator in Ottawa, and We-Can with Queen's University. She's also a regular speaker at many conferences, been featured in some national and local TV, radio, and print media. So we're very fortunate for her to join us here today. And her biggest accomplishment, she would say, is being a mother to two wonderful teens. She's got a host of other awards, included also being named Canada's top 19 tech titans in 2019 by IBM. OIT's Women Exporter of the Year, Kingston Business Hall of Fame inductee, Kingston's Businesswoman of the Year, and Queen's University's Jim Bennett Award recipient, along as the Kingston Chamber of Commerce's Young Entrepreneur Award. But the highlight of her career, she must say, is actually traveling with Prime Minister Harper on 2 trade missions to the Netherlands and China to represent Canada. That was a mouthful. So welcome, Peng. So happy to have you here. Before
Thank you.
Yeah. And before we kind of get into some of the questions we ask about leadership, tell us a little bit about what struck me was really interesting is like your experience coming to Canada as a refugee. Because I think some people might have some misconceptions about, when refugees come to a different country, what that means. Can you share a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for asking that question. I think it's so important that we talk about that subject matter because I think, to your point, there's a lot of misconception in our society and a negative, I say, a negative opinion about what refugees and what they do to Canada, and this idea that we refugee take advantage of the social systems in Canada. And I'll be the first to say that no, we do not. And I always say to friends and family or friends that, no one chose to be a refugees.
Hmm.
You become a refugees because your country is torn apart. It has to be such heart-wrenching, compelling reasons why we escaped our country where our friends and families are from to go to a country that sometimes we're very lucky. Canada's very welcoming, but you see a lot in the news that there are a lot of countries that are not very welcoming to a culture you don't understand, to a language you don't speak. And so I came to Canada in 1980 at the age of 10 with 9 siblings and my parents, and we did not speak a word of English. And we literally arrived with just the clothes on our back. And the government actually gave us a change of clothes, a pair of pajamas, a pair of shoes. And that was our beginning in Canada. And what people don't know is that, yes, the Canadian government were very kind to us, but uh, even the plane tickets that flew us to Canada, we actually had to pay it back. And in fact, we weren't allowed to apply for our Canadian citizenship until we pay that back. And I believe my dad, on a tight budget. So, for example, this is my older sister said, on a budget of $5 a day grocery bill for a family of 10. My dad was able to pay back the government in 3 years for our plane tickets so that we could become citizens. And I'm very proud to say that, today, all my siblings, their spouses, their kids, were all contributing to the tax pool that have many of the social programs in Canada. And most of us are entrepreneurs, one point or another, or professionals. So this is what refugee this is what we're all about. Thanks for the question, Janice.
I really love your answer to that and clarifying what refugee status really means and what it entails. I do agree with you that a lot of people do not understand the reasoning behind the refugee status to begin with, and the system that allows you to come in here, and also the fact that you do have to pay it back, right? What I love even more is, you know, my parents were immigrants as opposed to refugees. However, I think the assimilation to a new country is the same, even harder. Let's say if you don't speak the language. And you have been able to accomplish so much. I mean, like Janice read all of your accomplishments, and so we're very grateful for what you do for the country that we live in. This is a fireside leadership chat. What do you think, from 10 years old coming to Canada, seeing your parents really manage their resources well and still provide a loving home that you would all be contributing to society in the way that you do? Where do you think leadership started for you, and to accomplish everything? I mean, one, you're in a male-dominated industry. You have now gone through not even a merger and acquisition. It sounds like they just completely just acquired you all together.
No, they actually acquired just our intellectual property. So I just want to make that clear. ATS only acquired Transformix intellectual property.
Okay.
And I am now, after I spun off the remaining assets of Transformix to a new company, where 3 of my managers are running the business and I'm on the board. I'm now working for ATS as VP of Sales and VP of Sales for emerging markets and Symphoni, which is the technology they acquired. I just want to clear that up.
No, thank you. Thank you for clearing that. So, I mean, so Janice, I'm sure you're also curious as it relates to leadership, from refugee status to where does it come from? Where are the qualities, and what can you bestow upon people who don't have that same scenario, that would not have witnessed what you have witnessed?
Yeah, I think for me, I don't know if you see all these leadership courses, and I'm not sure if that thing is that is trainable or not, because in some way, I think leadership is innate, whether you're born with it or not. And then you take what's the raw skills, kind of the athleticism, and you can train from that and make it better. But for me, I think my two greatest coaches are my mother and my father. And the reason I say that is because, my siblings and I, who all end up being entrepreneurs, or necessarily not all, most of us end up being entrepreneurs, is we grew up listening to our parents talk about their past experience as business owners in Cambodia. They came from nothing and work insane hours to build a business for their 10 children. Eventually, there are 11 of us. One of my youngest brother was born in a refugee camp. But back then it was 10 children. And, the stories they tell about what they do. And ironically, I don't even know what the Chinese word is for leadership, because they never use those words. But I think it's, they talked about how my mom especially, she was a very progressive woman. I always call her a closet feminist. Because, I growing up, I was a bad Chinese girl, by all the Canadian parents' standard. I was the perfect child. By my Chinese parents, I was the bad Chinese girl. And I always joke that one day I'm going to write a book called The Bad Chinese Girl, because everything that was celebrated in Canadian culture, independent, ambitions, strength, were all frowned on when you come from a traditional Chinese family. So I was a bad Chinese girl. Yet, so I was always getting in trouble for being the bad Chinese girl, because of all those characteristics that I mentioned earlier. But when I do something successful, my mom would be so proud of it, right? Like, she would talk about it. My dad, not really as much. I think the first time I heard my dad said, "I'm proud of you," was, I think, when I was in my 40 or mid 40, when the first time that Prime Minister Harper had his group had invited me to an event that was in Mississauga. So I was driving there to Mississauga to be an audience that Prime Minister Harper's was speaking. And I think that was the first time my dad's like, "Oh, I'm proud of my daughter," But going back to the whole idea of leadership, and I always say that despite the fact that they had limited education, so one had like a grade 1 and the other had a grade 2 education, I learned everything about leadership from these two incredible people. And there's no truer test of whether or not the leadership style works than during the war in Cambodia, when, when things were really bad, the people that they led stood by them. So let me give you an example. We talk about stuff like that in the context of, let's say, a business failure, or a business, going to a downturn. Here, I'm talking about real life and death situation.
Mhm.
So Pol Pot took over. There was a civil war, and the Communist Party under Pol Pot took over Cambodia in April of 1974. And in essence, they forced us into labor camps. The entire population, all the cities were evacuated. Everybody was pushed into the forest, and we were put into these little, about 300 families or so, little village. Actually, no, not 300 family, but 300 people, and each one had like a leader and a co-leader that controls everything from what we eat to what we wear, and just everything. And I remember the first village that we were assigned to. My parents walked in, and the co-leader of this little village was a former employee. So my parents apparently turned to each other and just, great fear, realizing that our entire family is going to be slaughtered.
Yeah.
Because during that time, Cambodia under Pol Pot was killing, business people, educated people, foreigners, that sort of stuff. And so because this was a former employee, my parents figured that we're going to be killed because he's going to tell the soldiers who we are, right? That my dad was a business owner. And the guy in public would berate my parents and treat them horribly. But then behind the scene, he quietly whispered to my dad that because of the way my parents had treated their employees, he was not going to betray them, right? So, there's no greater leadership of measure of success than when you're in a life and death situation, the very people that you led did not betray you. And that was only one story. In 2014, when I went back to Cambodia with my dad and my older sister, similar story. We rented a van, did a journey through what our family went through with one of my cousins who still lives in Cambodia. And he brought up a similar story that in his village, someone had, there was a conversation between two people working in the rice field, and someone had pointed to my dad and said, that man over there. And the other person said, yeah. And he go, that was my former boss. And he said, well, go tell the soldier or betray him, right? Because back then, it's all about who you betrayed. I mean, children are taught to betray their parents. And so that's what the second guy said. And the first guy said, no, that man there, oh my God, I get emotional every time I talk about this stuff because it is very emotional. That man there, I would never betray, right? And it's to me, that's true leadership from them. And what makes them different, or what makes them unique in their leadership style, my mom talks about this all the time, is everyone has pride. So you always discipline in private and you praise in public. And despite the fact that my mother was a closet feminist and there was no role in their business, I think she was the HR director or the HR VP or the chief HR person without all these fancy titles, because she had maids and nannies and chefs and servants and people who worked in the factory, and she managed them all. And so we grew up listening to her talk about how she treated her people and what should she do to discipline them. And those are the message, those are the coaching that you never really think about as a kid. And I didn't until I started my own company. And then all these, messages flooding back, I asked my kid, they're sick of hearing mom go, if grandma was alive, or I gave them the same lesson. I said, don't worry, one day you will thank me like I'm thanking my mom now.
That's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I love all these beautiful stories around your parents, and it's great that it still brings that emotion to you, because I think these are the lessons that you're going to remember. So clearly your parents were your first role models, mentors, or what have you in leadership. And unintentionally so. So how have you adapted that, I guess, in your journey towards, you've obviously started your own company and then you've grown it. It's expanded internationally. Like, what are some of those key messages that you take along the way, and how have those kind of adapted or been adopted as you kind of move into this corporate arena?
Well, I think, like everything else, you have a strong foundation and you build on that foundation, right? So, my education, so I do have a degree in commerce from Queen's University. A couple of my early jobs prior to starting my business was in a leadership role. And, I think the foundation of the messages of my parent taught me was always there, but it wasn't really clarified until I grow into the role, because you make mistakes, you learn from it and go, oh, that's what mom meant, like, oh, and you don't really think about it. It's just kind of like a quick flash in your head, and it's like, oh, so that's it. And so you know I think I become a better leader as I age, just like I become a better mom as I age, because we all make mistakes. And I think one of the biggest lessons for me personally is to accept and embrace that you cannot be innovative, or you cannot think outside the box, or you cannot grow unless you're prepared to accept that you're not perfect and you're going to make mistakes along the way. And it isn't just when you make the mistake, it's not to punish yourself, whether it's you or your employees or your children, but rather to acknowledge the mistakes, figure out what it is and what you can learn from it and grow from that, right? And so I think I was fortunate because I had that strong foundation with the 18 years that I lived at home listening to my parents talk about their past, and then those lessons are further clarified as I moved along. I was thinking the other day in getting ready for this conversation, Janice and Lisa, is like, well, what is it different between, you read so much about leadership. And I think if I was to summarize, so I used to have a formula called success equal I square RP. One is integrity, which, learn from parents. Innovation, which is learning from my business. You always have to think outside the box to win. Respect, and this was a big lesson from my mom. My mom had no patience at all if you talk negatively about anybody. I remember I was telling my daughter this. I said, I remember I was about her age, about 10 or 11, and I was in Regina. I saw a lady, just very different or unique, if you want to call it, to the point you're kind of like, huh? And I said something, and my mom looked at me and said, who are you to judge her? And she just doesn't put up with stuff like that, right? And so I've learned, and I credit her for this, it's like every single person deserves respect, regardless of who you are, whatever your status is in life. I really don't care. We all deserve respect, and respect it goes both ways. So you can't expect to have people respect you if you don't start off by respecting them. And so I square RP. So integrity, innovation, respect, and passion. You got to love what you do. And if you love what you do, it shines, it makes you get up, you get energized. I think when you're happy and you're energized and you're excited, you have the capacity to step back and, as a leader, be able to control your emotion and, be available, the good emotion to be available to the people who needs you the most. Right. And so when I was thinking about this, I'm like, okay, a lot of what I just said, yeah, I can read up and everybody talks about it. But I think if I was to summarize it, I think leadership is a yin and yang between compassion and toughness. And I think that's what my mom was trying to get at, right? So the yin of compassion is the ability to listen to people for, do they have a bit for the best ideas that come forward. Compassion to step into their shoes when things aren't going well. Compassion to help them when things aren't going well. So, I had an employee years ago who had an emotional breakdown, and we actually was just not a pretty situation, but we spent the money, flew him to his family in the Maritime, that sort of stuff, right? So it's compassion of trying to put yourself in somebody else's shoes long enough to say, what does that person need? And one of my philosophy running Transformix is I would never ask an employee to do something that I wasn't willing to do. So if I ask them to come in on weekend, I'll be in the weekend. If it means like I go and buy them Tim Hortons, that's what I'm doing. It didn't matter. I want them to show that I was there for them. And you can't be in people's shoes if you're not part of the equation. So the first, the yin of it's a compassion part of it. And that there's so much that goes into that yin. The yang part of it is the toughness. And it's easy to be a leader when things are going great, right? Everybody can say, oh yeah, I'm a great leader. Sure, if things are going great. But the toughness come in being fearless in the face of crisis, fearless when you just want to crawl into bed and cry. And I've gone through that so many times where, we almost went bankrupt a few times. There was one year that I was going through an ugly divorce, plus my company almost went bankrupt and I was being sued. Everything was wrapped into one. So the fearlessness of always portraying this confidence that you can take on whatever that comes at you, and it's no matter how insurmountable it is, and your team is confident, and your children are confident that you're going to tackle it. So there's that toughness that go with it. But the bigger toughness is the strength to discipline when you really don't want to do it, right? Or to stand up for your employees against customer when most people won't do it. It's making those tough decisions that you really don't want to make, but you do it anyway for the greater good of whatever you're trying to do. A company, it's the greater good of the entire organization, not just for a specific employee or not just for you, right? So to me, if I was to summarize my leadership style, is the two yin and yang of compassion and toughness.
I almost want to ask, is one your mom and is one your dad?
It's kind of funny. Yeah. You know what? I never thought about it that way, but but my mother was a tough one. Believe it or not, like my father, I guess it's kind of like my husband, and I think he was physically tougher, obviously, but when it comes to emotional toughness, you just don't mess with my mother.
I get that a lot with a lot of like couples where the women are also play a strong role.
Yeah.
Outside, the men seem to have it all together, which they do, but it's the women that kind of like hold it together, I feel.
Yeah, and I think it's usually when emotional toughness is hard to measure, right? Because it's kind of like that whole oh god, what's that little story about a tea bag, like toughness like a tea bag, like women's like a tea bag. The longer you sip them, the stronger it comes out, right?
Right.
So anyway,
that's a good analogy. No, really, really lovely for you to express that. And so I'm gonna just pivot our conversation a little bit because we're talking about what you've done and how you've gotten to here. I know a big part of a lot of leaders is the give back and how they're giving back, the organizations that they're giving back to, and again, understanding constraints for time and just resources in general. Can you talk a little bit about, now that you've been here for a few decades and your children are grown, because I have an 11-year-old, so I imagine as time passes I will have more time to back even more. In the interim, I know that you are doing a lot to help business to continue and to come and rise. So do you mind sharing a little bit about what you're doing and what your hope is for these give back projects?
I think, and I'm very emotional about it, very passionate about it, is that I feel very blessed and very fortunate to have that our family land in Canada, because when you're a refugee, you don't really have a choice. You go wherever the first country is willing to take you, right? So you just keep your fingers crossed that somebody better than where you're coming from is going to take you from this nightmare. And so I'm very blessed that that it turned out to be Canada, and I love Canada, and so I've always, for the past 20 odd years as an entrepreneur, I've always found ways to give it back, whether give it back through, got my family to help set up a scholarship at St. Lawrence for women in STEM, whether it's giving back through, there's an organization called Crew that I donate to. I also ride to Conquer Cancer. So Crew is an organization that help underprivileged women in Cambodia get a law degree. Yeah, it's kind of cool. I also
Great.
Ride to Conquer Cancer the last 2 years, but I also sit on a number of boards that help entrepreneurs. And I think that's so critical because I think the foundation of our GDP and the foundation of our economic success is through the growth of our entrepreneurs ecosystem. And if I can help out in any way, I would. So, I've been on a number of board. Currently, I'm a coach for LSpark. I'm also a coach for an organization called We-Can, which stands for Women Entrepreneur Can, out of Kingston. And I love those. I jokingly said, it's what feed my soul, because being involved with entrepreneurs and this go-get attitude, and we're going to solve anything and fix anything. I mean, the world doesn't turn without entrepreneurs, right? And they are, honestly, they should be celebrated more than they are right now, because it is a tough role to take. I'm also involved in a couple of refugee programs now, which I'm really proud of. One is UNHCR, and I'm an advisory board for the Canadian division of UNHCR, and just basically raise awareness and raise funding. I'm also involved with an organization called Her Startup, and it's a spinoff of another refugee organization called Jumpstart Refugee. And my role is quite minimal. So with Her Startup, I do a little bit of mentorship if they need it. I was a guest speaker. I was there. Spokesperson for a crowdfunding raising that really we're doing early in the year. And entrepreneurs, it's challenging on its own, but when you're a woman newcomer to Canada that's struggling with issues that are cultural or language or whatever the case may be, and you don't have a network of support of family and friends that can provide that love fund that you need in the early stage of your organization, it is truly a struggle. So we did a crowdfunding, and I think we got 2 companies. We awarded 2 companies to launch the business, and we'll see how that go. I hope it's successful and we can do more in the future. But as I said, those are what feeds my soul and make me feel like I've contribute back. It's it's a little thing, right? Like I thought about it a little bit more recently, because for the past 24 years, when you're an entrepreneur and a full-time mom and sitting all these different boards, you barely have time to breathe, much less really analyze anything. And I always used to get really uncomfortable when people said, "Oh, you're a role model," or you're this or that, and I get very uncomfortable. But lately, I've been thinking about it, and I think I'm getting more comfortable with that role, or that definition we want to call it, only because I think people do need to see that a refugee who came here without speaking the language, struggle through all of that. It is possible, right? It is possible to be successful despite it all. It is successful despite what everybody say. And when you are successful, people will they try to find all sorts of excuses why you're successful, right? I had a woman who once said, "Oh, you're successful because you're short and cute." I'm like, damn, if I only know that was all it takes. I worked so hard.
That's what it is. Yeah.
Why did I only survive from 5 hours sleep in high school? It's all, that's what someone should have told me. But and I was in so interesting story. I was in Cambodia in 2014, and that was a year I had traveled on 2 trade missions with Prime Minister Harper. And my siblings, my older sibling, I guess they're so proud of it. They didn't tell me because, in our Chinese culture, we don't pat each other on the back. We just do our thing. But apparently, so the story was, so I was in a hotel lobby in Phnom Penh, the capital city of Cambodia. And this older gentleman approached me and he said, "Oh, I know you." And I said, "I don't know you, sir. I haven't been in Cambodia in 20 odd years, right? Or no, 30 odd years at that point." He's like, no, I know you. And I say, "Sir, I don't know you." So we go, "Is your last name Cau?" And this is all in Chinese, like a dialect of Chinese called Teochew, right? Because that's the main language in Phnom Penh. And I said, "Well, yes, that's my last name." And he said, "Well, it's your first name, Sang," which is my first name in the Chinese language. And I said, "Well, yes." And he said, "Well, I know you." And I'm like, "Okay, I don't know how you know me." So it turns out that he was traveling in Cambodia, And somehow he lives in Vancouver, but my brother had sent a photo of myself and the prime minister all through, like, I don't know how it
Internet.
got spread, right?
Right.
But this gentleman, he was almost emotional. He said, when we saw that photo, you made us proud because you represent the Chinese refugee from Cambodia that has succeeded. And I was like, I was almost in tears. Like, here I am just going on all along, going this trade mission thinking, hey, it's a good opportunity to expose my company to, the international market, right? I wasn't thinking beyond that. And for someone to say something like that, it's very touching. And that story kind of lived with me for a while.
May live with you forever. I mean,
Yeah.
every year that passes, you seem to be doing more and more things. And this is one of the reasons why Janice and I partnered to do this podcast. It was to really share information that people might not normally have access to. And with all of the media or the negative media rather, on just the generalization of refugee status, this is a really great story to share. And, may you be encouraged really to own that. I mean, I'm not Cambodian and I'm not Chinese, but I feel proud that you were able to do that. Like, I was almost in tears. I was like,
I'm super proud.
I feel that, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I think there are also more layers to the story. Definitely one for the refugees, but also this could be another long conversation, but I know we're captured for time. But like, what you said around, like, you grew up as being this bad Chinese girl and like having these qualities. Lisa and I will we probably made eye contact with each other.
like,
that could be an entirely different conversation.
Yeah.
But, I don't know, Lisa, do you have any other questions or for Peng?
Will you come back? You're such a great guest, like lots of really great stories. And I think there's so many more nuggets. And again, with the work that you're doing, I would love to see what happens with, the her startups and how refugee status, image, acceptance, or understanding progresses over time, because I think that's something to really pay attention to, especially as the world does what it's currently doing.
Yeah, for sure.
That would be my one question. Like, really, please, are you willing to come back? Yeah,
we're
absolutely.
Sure, that is already in my mind. That question is more like, is there a piece of, I know that you've got so many different nuggets for the audience, but is there one piece of advice you'd leave for somebody who's aspiring to do more and to become this future leader, whatever that looks like, something that they could focus on, or an area that they should think about? I know there are probably many things, but what comes to mind for you, and maybe a piece of advice that you've passed along to people that have probably come to you and said, like, Peng, like, what can I do to help forward myself in my own career or personal life?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Janice. And there is actually a story that I will share, and I get this a number of times now, particularly, this whole idea of being a bad Chinese girl, right? Because, and whether you're Chinese or, whatever nationality that you are from, I think most of us who are from a different cultural background has that kind of additional barrier to overcome. And so there's been a number of times now that I've been a guest speaker at different conferences, and this particular one stood out because I don't normally speak at engineering conferences because they get very too technical for my liking, but I did one anyway. And at the end of the conference, this very, very shy Chinese girl came up to me and she said, can I speak to you? And I said, of course. And she goes, can I speak to you in private? And I said, okay, sure. So let's go find a corner. And she said, how do I become you? I said, I'm flattered, but I don't want you to become me. Let's try to figure out how you become you. Because she said, I can't even speak. I can't even get a job because I'm so nervous. I want to become you. And so I said, don't become me, because, I have my own thing. Let's try to figure out how you become you. And my only advice to anyone who asks me that question is, I think the greatest gift you can give yourself is figure out how to laugh at your mistakes. And my 18-year-old daughter, she has perfected that, and I'm so proud of that. She's the biggest clut, honestly, and she'll be the first to tell you. I don't know how many people can throw a basketball, hit their own head, but that's my beautiful daughter. But what's amazing about it is that she is so dynamic. She's so outgoing. She is so charismatic, and she's not afraid. She's so unafraid. I think when you have the skill to laugh at yourself, then you can do anything in the world, because you'll be able to make mistakes. You can be able to laugh about your mistake before, and and then you can grow from it, and then you can move on. So that's my best advice to anyone who's like, how do I get out of where I am today? Take away that fear of, I don't want to make a mistake because people's going to laugh at me. Well, let them. You're living your life for you, not for anyone else. But laugh at yourself, because when you laugh at yourself, all the other laughter you cannot hear.
I love
And
that.
then you can figure out, how am I going to grow from this? And then you will grow from it, right? You will grow from it, because life is a constant stream of constant learning every single day. And I'm still learning. I'm still trying to, what's my next goalpost? I've done all these things, but what's the next goalpost, right? And I actually hate the question people, how are you successful? What's your secret? I'm like, I'm not successful, because my goalposts constantly move. And
Right.
so that requires a lot of, that ability to laugh, the ability to learn. That takes a lot of confidence. And if you accept that you are perfect the way you are, but it doesn't mean that you're perfect. It just means that you're perfect the way you are, and you're going to grow from that, and you're going to learn from that, and you're going to make all kinds of mistakes along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And don't be shy to reach out to people and say, hey, you know what, do you mind if I reach out to you and ask you questions? Or, there's a lot of us out there, I think, that enjoy being a mentor, enjoy being a coach, enjoy, giving that advice. And I had that when I started my business. I actually had a board of advisors that were retired executives. And I remember asking them, like, you've given me so much of your time for free. Like, how are you okay with that? He's like, hey, when you retire, you really want to stare at your spouse 24/7? You gave me something else to talk about. I'm like, okay, cool. So, reach out to people who've been there, done it. And, like what I do as a mentor now, as I always say to my mentee, is like, I want you to, learn from my mistakes, make your own new mistakes. Like, don't make my mistakes, right? So I say, reach out to people, but learn how to laugh at yourself and grow from it.
I love it.
Me too. That's really great. Thank you so much again.
Oh my God,
Peng.
thank you so much. This was such a great conversation. I loved all your stories and your lessons. I'm going to have to go listen back and just even like review and listen and make my own notes.
Yeah, they're really, really great. And all the best with the UN HCR, right?
Yeah.
And her startup. I think those are really great initiatives. And you're still working at Transformix, right? So
Or
Well,
technically,
yeah,
right?
or
at
ATS,
Yes, I'm
right?
still working at ATS. And then my manager, I helped spun off. And the reason I spun off these, like the
remaining
new
assets?
company, the remaining asset, is because one of the things I was concerned about when ATS acquired our intellectual property is that I was able to protect jobs. And so I think we probably protect about 90 plus jobs.
That's amazing.
Or percentage, sorry, 90+% of jobs. So ATS hired all the engineers, and then I was able to spun off the manufacturing side to a new company.
Nice.
Congratulations. Congratulations. A triple win-win-win, right? Like,
yeah, it's important, right? Because
Yep.
your people stick with you, and you can't just leave when it's good for you, right? You got to be there for them.
Yep. I love it. That's really great. Thank you so much again.
Thanks
a lot, ladies.
Yeah, same.
Have a good day.
Okay, you too.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.